Moving over to the bantamweight division now, we got Umar Nurmagomedov coming in at minus 1,500, going up against former flyweight champion Davison Figueiredo, who comes in at plus 850. Starting off on the Nurmagomedov side, he is coming off of a impressive but efficient performance over Mario Bautista, and that was a fight for him to get back into the win column after coming up short last year against Merab Dvalishvili in a title fight. Now, that was a fight where Nurmagomedov found himself as a pretty big favorite, but Dvalishvili showed some very good championship mettle, and he was able to squeeze out the last 3 rounds to win that fight on the scorecards. Nurmagomedov did a great job in the first 2 rounds, stopping the Dvalishvili style, landing better striking, out-wrestling him a little bit, but it seemed like that constant pace, that constant pressure, that constant activity from Dvalishvili caught up to Nurmagomedov, and that caused him to slow down and ultimately lose that decision. But at 30 years old, 19-1, he's clearly the next best bantamweight in the division. You got Petr Yan out there still, and the best thing for Nurmagomedov is for Petr Yan to have won that fight against Dvalishvili at the ending of the year, and that asserts Nurmagomedov back into the conversation of being a title contender, or at least challenging for the title next. Very well-rounded skill set, right? Coming from Dagestan, coming from the Nurmagomedov crew, we already know his high-level wrestling is always going to be on display, but he is one of the better strikers to come out of that camp as well, which is why it's so fun to watch him. He throws a lot of spinning stuff, a lot of crafty stuff. He sets up traps well. Like that knockout he had over Hani Barcelos was absolutely nasty, but he's very well-rounded. He has been clipped in a few fights, but he shows great awareness in terms of getting back into the game, getting right on a takedown attempt, chaining takedown attempts together, and then eventually getting fights to the ground. We saw it against Bekzat Almakhan. We saw it last time around against Mario Bautista, where he ate a clean knee, but wrestled right away and got back into the fight. Very tough kid, and I'd be very surprised if he never touches gold. This is a guy that will eventually find himself in a title fight, depending on how the Petr Yan stays busy. Maybe in 2026 we see Nurmagomedov fight for a title again. But first, he needs to get past former flyweight champion Davison Figueiredo, who was able to get back into the win column by pulling off a big upset over Montel Jackson last year. Now, going into that matchup, we saw Figueiredo look rejuvenated at 135 pounds, knowing he's getting up there in age and knowing all the issues he used to have in terms of cutting to 125 pounds. It was just a matter of time before he got to 135 pounds. And that's what we saw. He had dominant performances against Rob Font. Cody Garbrandt submitted him. I think that was UFC 300. Had a good victory over Marlon Vera. But then he ran into Petr Yan, which was just a bad stylistic matchup for him. Then he lost against Corey Sandhagen in a fight where I think he got his leg injured or something like that. It was a very weird position. But it seemed like Sandhagen was in control for the most part. And then the Montel Jackson fight. He relied heavily on his grappling, and that was enough for him to get the win that night by split decision. Now, previously in his career, he used to be a power puncher, walking his opponents down, looking for that head-hunting shot, trying to get them out that way, or jumping on a guillotine and trying to submit his opponents. But in recent fights, to try to conserve his energy, his gas tank has always been a question mark, he leans on his grappling. If he can assert that top position, if he can assert that grappling and just catch his breath on top of his opponent, that's where we often see him really start to grind his opponents out and have major success. But that's going to be hard to do against a guy like Umar Nurmagomedov, right? I knew that Nurmagomedov was going to be a favorite in this. I knew he'd be a big favorite, but even seeing minus 1,500 made me chuckle a little bit. That's a massive favorite. That is a very... just to take into consideration, minus 900 means you're 90% indicated. So, you're getting Umar Nurmagomedov closer to 95% indicated here in this matchup, and it makes sense. Unless Figueiredo catches with a big shot, he just has a puncher's chance. He's not going to out-wrestle Nurmagomedov. He's not going to outstrike him in terms of being a better minute winner. It's all going to come down to him landing that big shot or catching a guillotine, which we know that Nurmagomedovs are not going to tap from any sort of submission like that. So I'm expecting Nurmagomedov to work Figueiredo to the ground, slowly wear him down. I think he eventually gets that third round finish, so I'll be interested to see what that line is when the props actually drop for this matchup. But I like Nurmagomedov here. I like him to get that late finish. And again, I think we see him end up fighting for a title again, probably by the ending of the year if he stays active and if the champion stays active as well.